In northern Kenya, a team of scientists is hard at work uncovering the oldest tools ever made.
Yeah, all of this is the smooth outer surface of the artifact. And when I turn it round, you'll be able to see that it's completely different on the other side.
The site is called Lomekwi 3, which sits near Lake Turkana, one of the most important regions for understanding human evolution. By chance, the geology of this region has very well preserved layers that date to the time period when humanity was really going through huge evolutionary changes.
On the western side of Lake Turkana, the Nachaqui Formation, which is a strange sounding word, but it relates to a geological formation. The youngest part of the Nachaqui Formation is about 750,000 years old, but it goes all the way back, more or less uninterrupted, to 4.5 million years old.
What a wonderful coincidence. Yeah, I mean, I think Nick really hit the nail on the head. This continuous record that is unlike any other record that we know of in terms of its time depth and its ability to capture the swath of human evolution. It's sort of it's a wonderful, unique place to study these evolutionary trends.
I was fortunate enough to chat to two members of that team, Nicholas Taylor and Evan Patrick Wilson. We're going to discuss what the team found, who made them, and what we can learn about our evolution from the oldest archaeological site in the whole world. We've even got footage of monkeys using tools and taking a nap, which is a great addition to anyone's day. I can say with 100% confidence, it fundamentally changed how I view our earliest ancestors.
Wow, what a fantastic site. This is going to be a banger of a video. People are going to love this, for sure. They're really going to love this. Before I start, I just want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Babbel. It's a brilliant tool, one of the best language learning apps in the whole world. I've been using Babbel to brush up on my Spanish because I kind of have ambitions of making a video on the Olmecs, and whilst I'm here in North America, I kind of want to go to Mexico to do it. So I've been looking for ways just to practice Spanish in my daily life. These lessons are made by real language teachers, not made by AI. And I think it shows, straight from the get-go, you're learning real conversations, real Spanish.
Qué bien.
They even have live lessons with real teachers, and you get 2 free when you sign up. But it's also just fun. I like all the podcasts and audiobooks they have. I can listen to one when I'm walking to work.
Señora del Río. Para mí, también un café. Por favor.
Not many people know, after my archaeology degree and before I started this channel, I was a foreign language teacher, and I can 100% confirm that making learning a language part of your everyday routine is so crucial, it's so important, and Babbel is just a really fun way to do that. They've got a bunch of languages to choose from. Start speaking your target language in just 3 weeks. Use my code down below in the comment and the description to get 60% off. There's a 20-day money-back guarantee if it doesn't work out for you, so no worries there. So huge thanks to Babbel. Check it out. It's super fun. A great tool. A tool to help you make more tools in your target language. Let's go back to the video. To understand why Lomekwi 3 is so interesting, we need some context. And there's no better place to start than the Amazon rainforest. Here, a cheeky capuchin monkey gathers up seed pods fallen from a tree. But how to crack them open? Perhaps smashing them with a rock? Maybe smashing a rock with them? Success. Bish bash bosh. It's time to eat some seeds. After all that exertion, a well-earned nap. Good for you, capuchin monkey. I could watch footage of monkeys using tools all day. They're so smart and yet so adorable. Totes adorbs, totally adorable. Many primates use tools. Our closest relatives, chimpanzees, are well known to use sticks to fish for termites and ants, things like that. Or yoink mammals out of trees. They'll use stones and heavy branches to crack nuts. Primates just love tools. Our hands just allow us to manipulate things so well. But humans take it so much further than any other primate. We modify tools. We use tools to make other tools, which we use to make tools. On and on and on and on. In fact, our survival has become totally dependent on tools. No human can live or would even think about living without them. We've become absolutely evolutionarily dependent on an idea, on many ideas, which is the kind of thought that keeps you up at night. What is an idea, and how are we so dependent on it? Until recently, we didn't realize just how far back in time our love of tools extended.
So you can imagine, I'm sure that you and probably a lot of your viewers are familiar with Acheulean artifacts. Things like the typical hand axe, teardrop-shaped artifact that are found. The earliest examples that we know of now are in Africa, but they're also found in Europe and across parts of Asia as well.
Acheulean tools mark a major moment in our evolutionary history. They're so cool as well. They're so symmetrical, so beautiful. This is maybe the tool that our ancestors have used for the longest period of time, our first love maybe. The oldest Acheulean tools found so far date to around 1.8 million years ago, and they were used until maybe 100,000 years ago, maybe even later in some places. It's hard to really say exactly what is an Acheulean tool and when it comes to an end. But for sure, well over 1.5 million years, we were using these bad boys. The first multi-tool, truly. We believe they were produced by Middle Pleistocene hominins, I would say humans, like Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis.
Perfect. When those were first identified by researchers, it was in the sort of 1800s. And before, and gave the definite, clear idea that these are deliberately made tools. Not everybody, when they were originally identified in the 17th century, did think that. There were some other ideas at the time, like they'd been formed by lightning strikes. Some of them were called thunderstones and so on. But emerging ideas and understandings really showed that no, these artifacts were made by people in a remote period, in deep time.
What helped in the discovery of the Acheulean is that these are definitely man-made. Nature just can't produce something like this naturally. There's too many steps involved. The thing is with Acheulean tools, though, is that this was definitely not humanity's first attempt at making a tool. To go from just a plain rock to something like this could require the removal of 60 flakes, 100 flakes, 150 flakes. You definitely have to have the ability to visualize this symmetrical final form. It can't be produced by accident. You don't go from an ape like a chimpanzee using unmodified stone tools just to crack nuts open to something like this in one step. There has to be something earlier. Something had to come before this.
So people working in Africa, particularly researchers like Mary Leakey, working at Olduvai Gorge in the 1950s and 60s, were looking for sites that were both Acheulean in age, but also in that, magnificent open-air laboratory of technological and human evolution, were able to identify traces of earlier flaked artifacts that were lower down in the stratigraphy, therefore older, and were produced not to be shaped artifacts like we see in hand axes, but were more like sharp knives knocked off of pebbles and cobbles of stone.
These ended up being called Oldowan artifacts, and as you can see, they're much simpler.
Subsequent work as well was able to develop a dating record, of course, for these early materials. So for a long, long time, and before the discovery of Lomekwi 3, we're talking like 25 or more years, the oldest known Oldowan and the oldest known stone tools from anywhere were from a site called Gona in the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia. And those stone tools, they're not very numerous and it's not very dense, but very widely accepted that they date to 2.6 million years ago.
These are believed to have been made by early hominins like Homo habilis, who was found nearby and dates to a similar age. Homo habilis is actually the first member of our genus, and their placement in our genus is based on this idea that they were the first tool makers, and that the development of tools is somehow connected to the evolution of our genus, Homo. not earlier hominins like Australopithecus. No, no, no. We make the tools, not them.
And this was the standard model for several, really decades, that these Oldowan tools were probably the first tools made.
However, as more and more research came out about the Oldowan, archaeologists began to appreciate that it wasn't as simple as we first thought.
Although for several years, the stone tools found from these earliest Oldowan sites, they were characterized as being simple, as being easy to make, because all you need to do, quote unquote, is sort of hit two rocks together. And it didn't look like it was all that complicated. But as research progressed through the 90s, certainly into the 2000s, more and more examples emerged that showed that right at the beginning of this chronological record, around 2.6 and certainly by 2.3 million years ago, you've got actually hominins making Oldowan tools in quite complicated and sophisticated ways. They know what they're doing. They're not just hitting rocks together and hoping. They are able to conceptualize and cognitively process how is the best way to strike these rocks to remove lots of flakes, and to do it in a way where they can continue to knock flakes off a block, which is very difficult to do, actually.
We have, like pieces of the entire flaking process for the most part. There's things missing, of course, but you can replicate the original block that they began to break into these flakes. And when you do that, you can see this very skillful understanding of the geometry and the fracture mechanics involved in producing flakes regularly and efficiently, and not just wasting raw material. You're not just going to break it in half, throw it away, pick up a new rock. It's not so easy to find good rock.
So naturally, researchers began to question the Oldowan's place as the earliest stone tools ever made, and began looking for earlier sites, began looking for places where we could find earlier sites.
What that showed to researchers is that either hominins started making stone tools and were essentially experts at it immediately, or we're missing something, and there's an earlier part of the archaeological record where there was sort of a run-up. There was something earlier, another way of making stone tools beforehand that we haven't yet identified.
This brings us on to Lomekwi. What was found there? Are these stone tools? Are these the earliest stone tools? And who made them?
In the survey that we were doing approximately 10 years ago now, we bumped into, as Evan pointed out, this surface scatter of stone tools, or things that looked like they could be stone tools. And the discoverer, Sami Lokorodi, a local expert fossil and stone tool hunter, was the first person to say, hey, this could be important, and called the rest of the team over on the survey. And Sonia Harmond, who's the director of the West Turkana Archaeological Project and the lead expert in lithic technology, was getting pretty excited, because we knew that even though these are on the surface for now, all of the deposits around are old. So if we can find them within that deposit, this could be something that's a very old occurrence of stone tool making.
Finding prehistoric stone tools on the surface is great, fantastic. We love it. I would love it. But it's impossible to accurately date objects that are found on the surface, especially stone. To be able to do that, we need to find them in the ground. We need to find them in situ.
And we're all very grateful for it. Yes, they're under the ground. They are what we call in situ, embedded deeply in this extremely hard sediment. It's extremely what we call indurated. It's been hardened over millions of years with this pressure and the heat that has made this deposit just extremely strong.
From dating the sediment around the tools at Lomekwi, it was discovered that they were about 3.3 million years old. 700,000 years older than the Oldowan, roughly. With one discovery, they extended the entire archaeological record by 25%. The entire history of human technology by 25%. Which is, that's mental. That's crazy. Just adding another 25% onto human history. Bosh. There you go. Can we see one of them whilst we're here on the subject, Nicholas?
You can. So let me show you one example that's here. Yeah, all of this is the smooth outer surface of the artifact. And when I turn it round, you'll be able to see that it's completely different on the other side. So rather than being smooth here, it's got all these angular sort of fractures on this surface.
This is called a core. It was a piece of rock that had flakes removed from it. Unlike Oldowan tools, which can easily be held in one hand, the cores at Lomekwi are absolute monsters. Look at the size of it compared to Nicholas. These things are as big as your head. My first thought, honestly, was how do we know these aren't just natural rocks? To the untrained eye, to my eye, I would easily walk past this thing. Let's start with the tool that Nicholas is holding. Look at the top of this rock. Flakes have been removed in a very uniform way, in a line across the top of this rock.
So as you've seen on this piece, for example, this up here would have been the platform. This was where it was struck repeatedly. And each of these flakes that came off in the same direction. So what that shows us is that this area was the one where it was struck time and time and time again, perhaps up to, on this piece, 10, 15 times, always in the same direction and always along that same margin of the cobble. For this to happen naturally, you have to envisage how a large cobble like that could have, for example, rolled off a cliff or been in a fluvial system and only been fractured in one direction repeatedly from the same part of the tool each and every time.
It's not very plausible that nature can remove flakes in such a uniform, systematic way like that. If this was just one rock, you still might be able to dismiss it as natural. You know, nature is a complicated thing. Lots of stuff can happen. But the team found so much more than just the rock Nicholas is holding.
At the moment, what's Nick? Do you know the number off the top of your head of what we're looking at in terms of assemblage wise? It's over 100 for sure. It's somewhere around 150, 200, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow.
It's around 150 that are published. We do have more now, but yes, it's 150 that we have published.
The team also discovered that these rocks were being napped where they were found. They were being made at that exact spot at Lomekwi. They know this because they didn't just find the cores and the flakes that had been removed from the cores, and even in some cases, they could be refitted. You could put the flake back together with the core, which is a great sign that it's being napped there and that these are deliberately made tools. But they also found just the tiny little shards of rock, just the tiny little flakes that inevitably come off when you're making a tool. You can't just hit a rock and it breaks cleanly, perfectly into two pieces. It's always just going to create little tiny extra bits. And they found those next to the tools in situ.
And what that shows you, if you find it as a site, is that napping took place at that location.
So they have the cores and the flakes and the tiny little just useless flakes that come off when you're making a stone tool. But also at Lomekwi, there are no other rocks in that area that size. These rocks have been selected for. Someone put them there.
And additionally at Lomekwi, another aspect of it too is that in the deposits we find this site, the tools are the largest grain size of any rock, whether it be a granule of sand or a pebble. They are larger than the non-artifact stones in those deposits. So we don't find natural stones of this size in this sequence.
I know it seems like a stretch when an archaeologist holds up a rock and goes, look, a 3 million year old tool. You can't help but roll your eyes like, okay, who let the Paleolithic archaeologists out again? But in this case at Lomekwi, There's every reason to think that these are tools. Over 100 tools, 150 plus tools, broken in a systematic way, all in the same direction, with the evidence of napping all around them, the usable flakes, tiny little useless flakes. They're deposited in an environment with no other large rocks around them. It's so hard to imagine a scenario where nature would consistently break this series of rocks all in the same direction, just in that one spot. They're tools. These are tools. These are 3 million year old tools. So if that's the case, then who was making them? If Homo erectus and other Middle Pleistocene hominins produced Acheulean tools starting around
1.8
million years ago, early Homo, like Homo habilis, produced the older one around 2.6 million years ago, who was producing these tools at Lomekwi 3.3 million years ago?
It's very hard to establish exactly who. That's the first thing.
Assigning an author to stone tools deep in prehistory, millions of years into prehistory, is just so tough. It might honestly be impossible, maybe. Fossils and tools are so rarely found alongside each other, especially this far back in time. Once people start doing burials, humans and Neanderthals start burying their dead, then you can be more confident, because sometimes a tool is found right next to their hand. Like in my video on the Shanidar Neanderthals, one of them was seemingly buried with a tool found right next to their hand.
To our mind, and to many archaeologists, even if you found a fossil or partial fossil of a hominin at the site, it might give you somewhat of a smoking gun, but it's not definitive. So we have to think about this in terms of more complex and nuanced ways.
Currently, Lomekwi 3 is older than any of the fossils we've chosen to call Homo by hundreds of thousands of years. I think the earliest fossil that anthropologists attribute to Homo is about 2.8 million years ago, 500,000 years after Lomekwi. So at the minute, it doesn't seem that any hominin from our genus created them. But that could always change. You always have to keep in mind that the archaeological record is incomplete. And yeah, it could be that a Homo habilis was around at that time, and we just haven't found evidence for them. That's entirely possible.
That might change. We might find fossils that go further back in time that we attribute to Homo. And then we can happily sit with this idea that we had for many years that tool making is or the origin of tool making in the archaeological record is linked somehow to the emergence of Homo.
But as I said earlier, more and more this simple idea that Homo produced stone tools and earlier ancestors of ours didn't is really being questioned. It just doesn't seem to hold up so well with the evidence that we have.
But let's also be honest that Homo and Australopithecus and Paranthropus and these other genus names are also labels that we put onto a much more dynamic evolutionary record that goes back in time. So, saying that Homo is a toolmaker and Australopithecus isn't, or Paranthropus isn't, is probably not a useful default situation to start with.
The first possible candidate outside of Homo has to be Australopithecus afarensis, the most famous example being Lucy here. Good old Lucy. Shout out to my sister Lucy. Lucy herself dates to 3.2 million years ago. So right in that Lomekwi time period, right in there when somebody is producing tools at Lomekwi. Australopithecus afarensis has a really wide distribution across East Africa, but not really from anywhere near Lomekwi. But still, the archaeological record is incomplete. We have to keep that in mind. They could have been at Lomekwi and we just haven't found them. They have a wide distribution. They lived at the right time. Lucy here, she's a prime contender for the producer of Lomekwi tools. Another candidate that is at the right time but not quite the right place is a relatively new discovery, Australopithecus derimeter. Its relationship to Lucy and afarensis is not clear, I think. Derimeter was found in Ethiopia, I believe, so again, not by Lomekwi. But again, it's at the right time, has to be a contender. But the fossil that is roughly at the right time, but definitely in the right place, is in this box here. Let's do an unboxing. Hashtag YouTube. What child doesn't love to open a fresh skull on a Christmas morning? Kenyanthropus platyops. What a dramatic build-up.
Nearby to Lomekwi 3, before Lomekwi 3 was found, but in the same part of West Turkana, only about 5 kilometers away, was made the discovery by Mevliki and her team in the late 90s of Kenyanthropus platyops.
We only have one Kenyanthropus specimen ever found, and again, its relationship to Australopithecus, not clear, not known, not well understood. But as Nicholas said, it was found just 5 kilometers from Lomekwi.
So we know that around the time period that Lomekwi 3 is produced, Kenyanthropus is also on the scene. And those fossil remains from nearby are dated to 3.5 million years ago. So yes, there is an appreciable age gap, 200,000 years. But on the vast scales of time that we're talking about, it's probable that Kenyanthropus was around also at 3.3 and maybe after 3.3. We can't say for sure, but it's likely.
So Kenyanthropus is relatively close in time, definitely close in geographical sense. Until we find more fossils, they're the absolute prime contender for the producer of the tools at Lomekwi. But again, always have to keep in mind that the archaeological record, especially 3 million years ago, is incomplete. New discoveries could change our understanding completely. But until then, this has got to be the prime contender. Just as we were discussing this site, another paper came out here, which found Oldowan tools which date to between 3 and 2.6 million years ago. But what was so incredible about this new discovery is not only do we have the tools, but there's also a hippo found alongside them, which probably processed by those tools. But also amongst the remains was a molar belonging to a hominin species we call Paranthropus. I have them too, one second. A molar belonging to this chap, Paranthropus. We've thought for a long time that Paranthropus had a largely vegetarian diet made up of tough grasses and things like this. This idea came from analysis of their teeth, the fact that they have these huge jaws, big sagittal crest to hold their chewing muscles. They're a beast. They're massive. I love these guys. Yet seemingly, one of them was there when a hippo was being butchered. Again, does that mean that they were producing the tools and butchering the animal? So hard to say. They could have been butchered. Who knows what was going on? But the finds at Lomekwi and the discovery of a Paranthropus molar alongside Oldowan tools have really challenged this idea of Homo as the toolmaker and these three not producing modified tools. 3 million years ago, in the time period we're talking about, East Africa was probably a hugely dynamic environment. Lots of different groups of hominins, all evolving, experimenting with different ways to live and probably experimenting with making tools. I really wanted to ask Evan and Nicholas what we could sort of understand about the intelligence of these hominins, these ancestors of ours, from the stone tools. Could we understand their thought process or anything like that? It's kind of crazy. Honestly, their answer was kind of crazy. I'll never look at Australopithecus the same way again. It blew my mind. How far roughly are these stones traveling to Lomekwi?
Within 100 meters.
Okay.
So it's sort of consistent with what we see at the earliest Oldowan sites. It's local materials that are found usually in channels and other sources nearby where the hominins are using and making and probably living as well.
100 meters is obviously not very far, but it's not insignificant either. It's definitely a conscious choice to move something that far. It requires the forethought to know that you will need the tool, to go and get it and bring it back, maintain that desire for that period of time. But a big rock like that being carried by a small hominin, that was an effort. They put some effort into doing it.
They're carrying 10 to 20 kg natural stones. You don't want to go very far with that. It's a risk to pick up this heavy rock and lug it in your 1.2 meter tall body. Carrying that around is making you prime target for predators, accidents, all sorts of things. So it also speaks to maybe a limitation put on by the stones themselves, but they don't seem to be going too far, but they do seem to be seeking them out.
At the natural formation where these big rocks are available to the hominins, they did also have pebble-sized cobbles, like the kind to produce Oldowan tools. So clearly they're desiring these larger rocks. They're choosing these larger rocks for some reason. This probably says something about their napping technique.
When you actually look, even just flake by flake, when you consider the size restraints that the actual blocks of rock are going to put on the manufacturing process, the kinds of problems you need to overcome to successfully and repeatedly flake these pieces, it suggests a level of skill and understanding of that process that is still pretty impressive, even at this time.
For whatever reason, they chose to move large rocks. But they weren't just picky about the size of the stone, they were also selecting it based on its properties, on its material properties. From all the stones available to them, they seemingly selected the hardest rocks, basalt rocks, to use as anvils.
Having more density allows the force that you put in with your hammer to bounce back up from the anvil and give you sort of a counter force. So you have force going in from the rock you're striking with, passes through the stone into the anvil, and the density of the anvil will push the force back up, creating a counter force. It allows you to break rocks in ways and also process materials in ways differently than using the bimanual method. So it seems that they have an understanding of this. They seem to at least grasp aspects of rock quality.
To make the flaked tools, they're selecting a rock called faunolite, which just has a much better ability to create usable flakes.
And in addition, they also have a sort of preference for a rock called faunolite, which is another one of these volcanic rocks. And in the region of West Turkana, the faunolite is used consistently by hominins for over 1 million years to produce stone tools into the Acheulean. And it's relatively good raw material. It's locally abundant. And they have a preference for flaking on this material. So we have a good bit of evidence for basalt with lots of bits of pounding on it, lending it to that anvil idea. But then you see a lot of the heavily flaked cores, as well as a lot of the flaked pieces that we find are in this faunolite, this material that does have a better quality of flaking than the basalt or one of these really, really low quality materials that just turns to dust when you try and flake it.
It's really incredible stuff. It's really so incredible. Let's for a moment just put ourselves in the mind of one of these hominins. They had the realization or desire to create a tool. They had to understand and know their local environment well enough to travel to that specific spot where the rock was available. Once there, they selected the rock they needed based on some sort of basic understanding of the geology, of the material properties of it. They then carried this big rock back 100 meters to the spot where they preferred to make tools for whatever reason, make the tool, which can't happen by accident. The rock was napped in a deliberate manner, all those flakes taken along the edge, and then finally you have to use the tool for their intended task, whether that's processing an animal or tough plant foods is difficult to say. All of this requires a huge amount of forethought, being able to conceive of your goal and maintain it through all these different steps is incredibly intelligent. It's a very smart thing to do. It's just incredible. I don't know any other way to say it. It's just incredible. I'll never look at these guys the same way again.
No, absolutely. And that's why, the technological record is so important. That's why the archaeological record has to stand side by side, in lockstep with the fossil record, because as important as the fossil record is, and it's massively important, there are certain things that it's not great at telling us about. And one of those is how the brain is actually working. What are hominins thinking? What are they capable of in terms of cognitive processes? How complex can they think, and how far ahead can they plan? Those aren't things that you can assume comfortably from the amount of cubic centimeters inside a skull.
I think the main reason why we love seeing primates use tools, monkeys and chimpanzees use tools, is because we can kind of see ourselves in them. We can easily imagine ourselves going through the same steps to crack a seed open. Like, imagine you were just dropped in the Amazon jungle and you had absolutely no tools, but you found a seed. you're probably going to do something similar to that capuchin monkey to break it open. We just use tools instinctively, and we can easily put ourselves in the mind of another creature that uses tools. We can empathize with that. We can see ourselves in that little capuchin monkey, in that chimpanzee. We understand that thought process as tool users ourselves. But now imagine you could see one of these hominins walking upright like us, going through all those steps to produce the stone tools at Lomekwi. It would be absolutely fascinating. We would 100% see ourselves in them and recognize them as our earliest ancestors. I have no doubt in my mind about that. We started this talking about this journey back in time, trying to find the origins of our tool use. Do you think you've hit it with Lomekwi, or do you think there's still more to go? Still more time to go back?
There's more time to go back.
Yeah. There's more time. There's probably more stone tools even further back, but also there's probably tools that we'll never find because of preservation issues. I mean, think about the swath of organic materials being used by our closest living primate relatives, chimps, today. There's no doubt that there were technologies that we'll just never know about. Things that were probably critical.
Yeah. You can come in, Em. I know you've got to go to work. That's my very forgiving wife who doesn't mind me waking up at 5:30 to come talk about rocks. But
she probably just thinks you're a bit mad, but I think that goes for all three of us. So there we go.